The judge's voice echoed through the courtroom, calm and final, as if he were reading weather conditions instead of deciding the rest of our lives. The adoption is approved and legally complete. I didn't cry at first. I couldn't. My body felt hollow, like all the air had been pulled out of my lungs at once. My grandson, no, my son, sat beside me, his fingers curled tightly into mine, grounding me in that moment. 15 years of fear, sacrifice, and quiet endurance ended with one sentence. But to understand how we got there, you need to go back to the night it all began. I'm Barb. I live in a small town in Ohio, in the same modest house where I've packed lunches, wiped tears, and watched a little boy grow into a young man. Most nights are quiet now, but 15 years ago, my life cracked open at exactly 11:47 p.m. I remember the time because I stared at the clock before answering the phone, already knowing nothing good comes from calls that late. It was my daughter. We hadn't spoken in months. Her voice sounded thin, frantic, like it might disappear if I didn't listen hard enough. "Mom, I need you to come get the baby." No greeting, no explanation, just panic. She was staying in a roadside motel just outside town. I didn't even change out of my nightgown, just grabbed my coat and keys and drove, my hands shaking the entire way. The radio played softly, but I couldn't tell you what song it was. My mind was too busy bracing for something awful. When I opened the motel door, the smell hit me first: stale smoke, sour trash, and something else I didn't want to identify. The room looked like it hadn't been cleaned in weeks. Fast food bags littered the floor, ashtrays overflowed, and there on the carpet sat my 3-month-old grandson, not in a crib, not even on the bed, on the floor. His face was red and blotchy from crying, his little fists clenched tight, his clothes stiff with dried formula. The moment I picked him up, he quieted, like he'd been waiting for someone, anyone, to hold him. My daughter wouldn't look at me. "I just need a break," she said, pacing. "A few days, I need to figure things out." But as I held that baby, feeling how light he was, how desperate his cries had been, I knew something she didn't say out loud. This wasn't a break. This was goodbye. And I had no idea that by walking out of that motel room with him, I was stepping into the longest fight of my life. Because 3 days later, when I tried to return him, my daughter had vanished without a trace. The first night back home, I told myself it was temporary. I set the baby carrier beside my bed and slept with one hand resting on his tiny chest, feeling it rise and fall. Every few minutes I checked to make sure he was breathing. He smelled like baby soap by morning, not motel smoke, and I took that as a sign, like maybe things were already turning around. By sunrise, I had a plan. I would give my daughter a few days, maybe a week. She'd cool off, realize what she'd done, and come back for her child. People panic. People make mistakes. Mothers don't just disappear. I was wrong. I called her phone that morning. Straight to voicemail. I left a calm message, told her the baby was safe, fed, sleeping. I called again that afternoon, and again before bed. By day 3, I'd stopped pretending. Her phone had been disconnected. No address, no note. No explanation, just absence. That's when fear replaced hope. I took my grandson to a pediatrician because I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. The doctor's face tightened as she examined him. Severe diaper rash. Dehydration, missed checkups. He cried during the exam, but he stopped the moment I picked him up, like he recognized safety when he felt it. I cried in the car afterward. Not loud, dramatic crying, quiet crying. The kind that happens when reality sinks in and there's no one left to blame but the truth. I called child services myself. That was one of the hardest calls I've ever made. Reporting your own child feels like betrayal, even when you know it's necessary. They came, asked questions, looked around my house, watched how I cared for him. They documented everything. Then they tried to find her. They couldn't. Weeks passed, then months. I bought bottles, diapers, clothes, everything a baby needs, using money I didn't have. I quit my part-time job because childcare cost more than I earned. Nights were long. My body ached in places I didn't know could hurt. I learned how to rock him just right, how to hum him to sleep, how to stretch a can of formula one more day until payday. Some months, I ate less so he could have more. I told myself it didn't matter. Because somewhere between his first laugh and his first time gripping my finger, something shifted. I stopped thinking of him as my grandson. He became my responsibility, my purpose, my child. I kept records without realizing why. Doctor visits. School forms later on, receipts. Every piece of paper with my name on it beside his. It wasn't strategy, it was survival. People would ask, "Where's his mother?" I'd smile politely and say, "She's not around." Inside, I wondered if she ever would be, but what terrified me most wasn't raising him alone. It was the thought that one day, after all this time, she might come back and claim him like nothing had happened, and I had no legal right to stop her. I didn't know it then, but the silence that followed wasn't peace. It was the calm before a much bigger storm. By the time he turned 4, our life had settled into something that almost felt normal. Mornings started early. I'd pour cereal while he lined up toy cars across the kitchen floor, narrating elaborate stories only he understood. Afternoons meant library trips and playgrounds. Nights ended with the same ritual: 2 storybooks, 1 song, and his small hand resting on my wrist until sleep found him. We didn't have much, but we had rhythm. And love filled in every gap money couldn't. I became Mama Barb somewhere along the way. It happened so naturally I didn't correct him. When teachers asked me to sign forms, I did. When doctors asked if I was his parent, I nodded. Explaining felt unnecessary and painful. My daughter called once when he was 2, just once. Her voice sounded distant, like she was calling from another life. She asked how he was, said she'd been busy, promised she'd visit soon. She didn't. A year passed before I heard from her again, then another year, then nothing. I stopped counting. He started school with a backpack bigger than his body and shoes I'd bought secondhand. I walked him to the bus every morning, waving until it disappeared around the corner. Every afternoon, I waited on the porch, pretending not to worry even though I did, every single day. Mother's Day was the hardest. He'd come home with handmade cards covered in glitter and crooked hearts. "I made this for you," he'd say proudly. I'd smile and thank him, then cry later in the bathroom where he couldn't hear me. I didn't want to replace his mother. But I had. The question came when he was 7. We were baking cookies, chocolate chip, his favorite, when he suddenly stopped stirring and looked up at me, serious in a way that didn't belong on a child's face. "Mama Barb," he said, "why doesn't my real mom come see me?" The room went quiet. Even the oven seemed too loud. I knelt beside him, wiped flour from his cheek, and chose my words carefully, because some truths can't be unspoken once they're said. "Sometimes," I told him, "grown-ups make choices they're not ready to face. That doesn't mean you aren't loved. It just means they're not able to show it the right way." He nodded, but I saw the hurt settle in anyway. That night, I sat on the edge of his bed and watched him sleep longer than usual. I wondered how many more times I'd have to explain someone else's absence. How many ways a child can feel unwanted even when he's cherished every single day. As he grew, so did my fear. Legally, I was nothing more than a caregiver. If something happened to me, if I got sick or worse, there was nothing stopping his mother from reappearing and taking him away. The thought lived in the back of my mind, quiet but constant. I began saving what little I could. A few dollars here, a few there. I didn't know what I was saving for yet, only that one day I'd need it. And then, just when I believed she was gone for good, the phone rang again. 13 years of silence ended with one call, and this time she wasn't asking how he was. She was coming for him. The call came on an ordinary afternoon, which somehow made it worse. I was folding laundry at the kitchen table when my phone buzzed with a number I didn't recognize. I almost ignored it. Telemarketers had become relentless, and I was tired. But something in my chest tightened before I answered, like my body knew what my mind hadn't caught up to yet. "Mom." I hadn't heard my daughter's voice in years, but I recognized it instantly. Older, smoother, confident in a way it had never been before. She spoke as if no time had passed. No apology, no hesitation. Just slipped back into my life like she'd only been gone a weekend instead of most of a childhood. She told me she was back in Ohio. Different city. Better job, better apartment. She said things were finally stable, that she'd been doing a lot of thinking. Then she said his name, not the baby, not your grandson. My stomach dropped. She wanted to see him. I asked when. She said soon. That word again. It had followed her for years, always empty. But this time, something felt different. He was 13 now, tall, sharp, perceptive, not a toddler she could hand back and forth. And then she said it. "I think it's time I took him home." The world went quiet. I don't remember what I said next, only that my hands were shaking so badly I had to sit down. She talked about how she could give him more now. Better opportunities. Better schools. A better life. As if love were a transaction. As if 13 years of scraped knees, late-night fevers, homework help, and quiet reassurances could be erased with a paycheck. I told her she couldn't just show up and take him. She reminded me, calmly, that legally she was still his mother. That night, I didn't sleep. I watched him breathe, listened to the familiar sounds of our house, and realized how fragile everything was. I had built a life on trust and routine, not paperwork. I had never made it official because I couldn't afford to, and because part of me believed she'd never come back. I was wrong. She showed up 2 weeks later, standing on my porch like a stranger wearing my daughter's face. Polished, confident, expensive clothes. She looked like someone who had options now, and she wanted to exercise them. When he came home from school and saw her, he froze. "Who's that?" he asked. She stepped forward, smiling too wide. "I'm your mom." The silence that followed was heavier than anything I'd ever felt. He looked at me, confused, then something hardened in his expression. "I don't know you," he said quietly. The door closed behind him with a finality that echoed through the house. She cried. She accused me. She said I'd poisoned him against her. But the truth was simpler. You can't abandon a child and expect them to wait. That night, after she left, I sat at the same kitchen table where I'd once folded tiny onesies and made impossible choices. And for the first time, I knew exactly what I had to do. I wasn't just protecting him anymore. I was preparing to fight for him. The next morning, I called a lawyer and learned just how brutal the law can be when love isn't written on paper. The lawyer's office smelled like old paper and burnt coffee, the kind of place where hope goes to be measured and priced. She listened without interrupting as I told the story, from the motel room to the porch confrontation, occasionally jotting notes, occasionally raising an eyebrow. When I finished, she leaned back and folded her hands. "You've essentially raised him his entire life," she said, "but biologically, she's still his legal parent. That matters." Those words landed like a punch. I asked what my options were. She didn't sugarcoat it. Adoption based on abandonment was possible, but only if we could prove long-term absence, lack of support, and that removing him from my care would cause harm. Even then, it wouldn't be easy or cheap. She named a number that made my chest tighten. That night, I opened a shoebox I'd kept hidden in my closet. Inside were envelopes, receipts, folded bills, and notes I'd written to myself over the years, proof of every sacrifice I'd never planned to justify. I realized then that I hadn't been saving for comfort. I'd been saving for war. We filed the petition weeks later. When my daughter received the papers, she didn't call. She showed up again, angrier this time. She accused me of stealing her child, of manipulating him, of turning him against her. She said she'd changed, that she deserved a second chance. I asked her where that chance had been for 13 years. Her lawyer was better than mine. Sharper. Louder, he argued I was too old, too poor, too tired to raise a teenage boy. He implied that love wasn't enough, that stability had a price tag I couldn't afford. I went home shaking. My son noticed. That night, he sat across from me at the kitchen table, the same place he'd learned his letters, and asked the question I'd been dreading. "Are they going to make me go with her?" I told him the truth, the honest, terrifying truth. "I don't know," I said softly, "but I promise you this, I will fight with everything I have." He nodded, jaw tight, trying to be brave in a way no child should have to be. The months that followed were brutal. Interviews, home inspections, psychological evaluations, strangers picking apart our life, our routines, our bond, deciding if it was enough. He was asked where he felt safe. I was asked how long I expected to live. Every question felt like an accusation. Every answer felt like a test. At night, after he went to bed, I lay awake wondering if love could really lose to paperwork. If 13 years of showing up every day could be erased by biology and money. And then came the call from my lawyer. The court wanted to hear directly from him. Alone. And what my son said behind those closed doors would change everything for all of us. The courthouse was colder than I expected. Not just the temperature, the feeling. Marble floors, high ceilings, voices echoing like everyone was afraid to speak too loudly. It was the kind of place that makes ordinary people feel small, and that morning I had never felt smaller. My daughter sat across the room with her lawyer, dressed like she belonged there. Confident posture, steady smile. She looked like someone who had practiced this moment in the mirror. I kept my eyes forward, hands folded in my lap, reminding myself to breathe. My son wasn't allowed in the courtroom yet. That hurt more than anything. He had to wait with a court-appointed advocate while adults debated his future like it was a business arrangement. I wanted to protect him from all of it, but this was the one thing I couldn't shield him from. The hearing started with arguments. Her lawyer spoke first. He painted her as a woman who had stumbled early in life but found her footing. A mother who had made a temporary decision during a difficult time and was now ready to reclaim her role. He talked about opportunity, resources, and what money could provide. Then he talked about me, my age, my fixed income, my health. He suggested, politely, professionally, that I might not be around long enough to finish raising a teenage boy. I sat still while my heart broke quietly. My lawyer responded with facts. Records, dates, years, 13 of them, medical appointments I attended, schools I enrolled him in, nights I stayed up when he was sick. Every responsibility I took on when no one else would. But facts are heavy things to carry when emotions are involved. Then the judge spoke. I'd like to hear from the child. My breath caught. They brought him in through a side door. He looked so young in that room, tall for his age, but still just a kid. His hands were clenched. His eyes searched for me immediately, and when they found mine, he relaxed just a little. The judge asked that everyone leave except him. That wait nearly broke me. 45 minutes felt like 45 hours. I paced the hallway, replaying every moment of his childhood, wondering if I had done enough. Wondering if love could really compete with blood. When the door finally opened, he stepped out with red eyes but a steady expression. He didn't say a word. He just walked straight to me and held my hand. That's when I knew. Back inside, the courtroom was silent as the judge reviewed his notes. He looked tired, like this decision weighed on him more than most. He spoke slowly. This case isn't about biology alone, he said. It's about presence, consistency, safety. He looked at my daughter. You may have given birth to this child, but you did not raise him. Then he turned to me. And you did. My knees nearly gave out, but he wasn't finished. He asked everyone to remain seated. He needed time, he said, to consider the ruling carefully. The gavel didn't fall that day. Instead, we were sent home to wait. Again. I thought the waiting was over, but the judge's final decision would come with words I'll never forget, words that changed our lives forever. The call came 3 days later. I was standing at the sink, hands submerged in soapy water when my phone rang. One look at the caller ID made my heart stumble. My lawyer's name. I dried my hands slowly, as if speed might somehow change what she was about to say. The judge has made his decision, she told me. You need to come in tomorrow. I barely slept that night. My son tried to act normal, packed his backpack, ate his cereal, but I could see the tension in his shoulders. Fear has a way of living in the quiet spaces. Before he left for school, he hugged me longer than usual. No matter what happens, he said, I'm with you. I nodded because if I tried to speak, I would have fallen apart. The courtroom was fuller this time. More people, more eyes. My daughter sat stiffly beside her lawyer, jaw clenched, hands folded so tightly her knuckles were white. She didn't look at me. The judge entered. Everyone stood. Then we sat. He didn't waste time. He spoke carefully, deliberately, like someone who understood the weight of every word he was about to say. He summarized the case, years of absence, sudden reappearance, competing claims of love and responsibility. Then he addressed my daughter. You had opportunities, he said. Many of them, you chose not to take them. Her eyes filled with tears, but she didn't interrupt. He turned to me. For over a decade, you provided care without expectation of reward. You gave stability when none existed. You became the constant in a child's life when everyone else walked away. My heart pounded so hard I thought I might faint. The courtroom was completely silent when he delivered the ruling. The adoption is granted and finalized. 6 words, that was all it took. My son gasped beside me. I didn't realize I was crying until my lawyer squeezed my shoulder and whispered, You did it. My daughter broke down. Her lawyer put a hand on her arm, already speaking in low tones about appeals and next steps. But I couldn't hear any of it. The only thing that mattered was the boy sitting next to me, staring up at the judge like he was afraid this might disappear if he blinked. The judge looked directly at him then. "You spoke clearly and honestly," he said. "Your voice mattered." That was when my son stood up and did something no one expected. He crossed the courtroom and wrapped his arms around me, not quietly, not carefully, like a child who finally knew he was safe. We left the courthouse together, hands clasped, breathing in the ordinary air of an extraordinary day. Outside, the sun felt warmer. The world felt steadier. But the story didn't end there. Because winning in court doesn't mean the past disappears, and what came next tested us in ways we never saw coming. I thought the hardest part was over, until my daughter made one final move that nearly shattered everything we'd fought for. I thought winning would feel louder. I expected relief to crash over me like a wave, to wash away the years of fear in one clean moment. Instead, it came quietly, soft, fragile, like something that could still be taken if I wasn't careful. The first week after the ruling felt unreal. My son kept asking questions that broke my heart in small ways. "So, you're really my mom now? What if she changes her mind again? They can't undo it, right?" I answered every one patiently, even when my own certainty wavered. I showed him the paperwork, the judge's signature, the official seal. I explained that the law was finished with us now, but emotions don't follow court orders. My daughter didn't accept the outcome quietly. The emails started first. Long ones. Angry ones, then short ones filled with accusations. She blamed me for everything, for her absence, her regret, even her loss. My lawyer told me not to respond. "Silence is protection now," she said, so I stayed silent. My son pretended not to care, but I saw it in the way he flinched when the phone buzzed. In how he checked the driveway before getting out of the school bus. Trauma doesn't disappear just because justice shows up late. One afternoon, a thick envelope arrived in the mail. Appeal paperwork. My hands shook as I opened it. Even though my lawyer had warned me it was likely, seeing it in black and white reopened every fear I thought I'd buried. I called her immediately. "She doesn't have grounds," she reassured me. "This is desperation, not strategy." Still, desperation is dangerous. For weeks, we lived in limbo again, waiting for a higher court to decide whether our life could be disrupted one more time. I went through the motions: grocery shopping, laundry, homework help. But underneath it all was the same quiet dread I'd lived with for years. Then the letter came. Appeal denied. No hearing, no reconsideration, no second chance. This time, the relief did hit me. My son cried, not big, dramatic sobs, but the kind that come from finally letting go. He leaned into me, his forehead against my shoulder, and whispered, "So it's really over?" "Yes," I said. "It's over." We celebrated simply. Pizza on the couch. A movie we'd already seen a dozen times. No speeches, no toasts, just togetherness. But even as life slowly settled into something new, I realized something important. Winning didn't erase the years of instability. It didn't magically heal abandonment. It didn't make me younger or richer or less tired. What it did was give us permission to move forward without fear. And that mattered more than anything. But healing doesn't happen all at once. And the final lesson this journey taught me came from an unexpected place I never imagined. Life didn't suddenly become easy after the appeal was denied. It became different. The fear that had lived in our home for years slowly loosened its grip, but it didn't vanish overnight. Some habits were hard to break. I still double-checked locks before bed, still kept important documents in a folder by the door, still listened for the sound of tires slowing in front of the house. Trauma teaches you to stay ready. My son changed, too, but in quieter ways. He slept better, laughed easier. His shoulders stopped hunching forward like he was bracing for impact. For the first time, he started talking about the future without looking over his shoulder. College, a job, traveling somewhere warm. Normal dreams. One evening, not long after the final decision, we sat on the porch watching fireflies drift through the yard. The same yard where he'd learned to ride a bike, fallen, cried, and gotten back up again. "Do you ever wish," he asked carefully, "that things had been different?" I knew what he meant. Did I wish my daughter had stayed? Did I wish I hadn't spent years stretching every dollar? Did I wish motherhood had come to me in an easier form? I thought about it for a long time before answering. "No," I said finally. "I wish you hadn't been hurt. But I don't wish you had been someone else's child." He nodded, absorbing that. Then he surprised me. "You know," he said, "I don't think being a mom is about who starts it. I smiled. I think it's about who stays. That was the moment it all made sense. Motherhood wasn't biology or paperwork or titles handed down by a court. It was midnight fevers, sacrificed meals, showing up even when no one was watching. It was choosing a child again and again, even when it cost you comfort, sleep, or certainty. I didn't steal a child. I stayed when everyone else left. People still ask me how I did it, how I raised a child on so little, how I had the strength to fight someone younger, wealthier, and biologically connected. The truth is simple. I didn't have strength. I had love, and love has a way of teaching you how strong you need to be. But our story wasn't finished yet, because the final chapter wasn't written in a courtroom or a lawyer's office. It was written in something much quieter. And in the end, the greatest reward of all wasn't winning. It was what my son said to me years later that finally made every sacrifice worth it. Years passed quietly after that, not the kind of quiet that comes from loneliness, but the kind that grows when fear finally leaves a home. Life found its rhythm again. School turned into graduation plans. Baseball practice turned into part-time jobs. The little boy who once needed my hand to cross the street grew into a young man who reminded me to rest when my knees ached. One afternoon, a thick envelope arrived in the mail. A new birth certificate. I held it carefully like it might dissolve if I breathed too hard. There it was in plain ink, my name listed as his mother. Legal, final, undeniable. I sat at the kitchen table and cried the kind of tears that come from release, not pain. I didn't frame it. I didn't hang it on the wall. I put it in the same folder where I'd kept years of proof, medical forms, school records, scribbled notes, because that's where it belonged. Among the quiet evidence of a life lived fully, even when no one was applauding. My daughter never came back. She sent one last message months later, short, bitter, final. I didn't reply. Not because I hated her, but because responding would have meant reopening a door that no longer needed to exist. Some chapters are meant to close without explanation. The real ending came years later, on a day that felt so ordinary I almost missed its importance. My son, grown now, taller than me, stood in the kitchen watching me struggle with a stubborn jar. He took it gently from my hands, opened it with ease, and set it back down. "Sit," he said. "I've got dinner tonight," I laughed. "Since when do you cook?" "Since I realized how much you did without anyone ever thanking you." That night, over a simple meal, he said something I'll carry with me for the rest of my life. "You know," he said, not looking at me, "people always ask about my mom." My heart paused. "And I tell them the truth," he continued, "that my real mom is the one who stayed, the one who fought, the one who never made me feel like a burden." He looked at me then. "That's you." In that moment, every skipped meal, every sleepless night, every dollar stretched thin, every single sacrifice fell into place. I didn't raise him hoping for gratitude. I didn't fight to be recognized. I didn't stay because it was easy. I stayed because love doesn't leave. And if there's one thing this life has taught me, it's this. Family isn't decided by blood. It's decided by who shows up, again and again, especially when it's hard. That was my reward, not the ruling, not the paperwork, not the victory, but the quiet certainty that when he says my mom, he means me. And that has always been enough.